Picture this, it is 1945. The guns of World War II have just fallen silent, but a different kind of war is about to ignite, not in the trenches of Europe, but in a cramped, rain-drenched town hall in Manchester, England. In that room, a Trinidadian radical, a Ghanaian student, and a handful of exiled intellectuals are about to do the unthinkable. They are going to draw up a blueprint that will dismantle the largest empire the world has ever seen without firing a single bullet. Just 70 years earlier, European powers had sat in Berlin and carved up Africa like a Sunday roast. But in this shabby British hall, an idea, born in the diaspora, nurtured in Harlem and London, was about to travel back home and shake the continent to its core. How did mere words defeat colonial armies? How did scholars and exiles lay the groundwork for the sovereignty of millions? Today, we trace the incredible intellectual migration of Pan-Africanism, from the minds of Du Bois and Padmore to the liberation giants, Nkrumah and Kenyatta, who turned a dream into a reality. Welcome to Decroly History Hub. Let's uncover the blueprint of African freedom. Part 1. The birth of an idea. London, 1900. The year was 1900. Queen Victoria sat on the British throne, and the sun had not yet set on the British Empire. 15 years had passed since the Berlin Conference of 1884-85, where European powers had sat around a table in Germany and carved up the African continent like a roast at a Sunday dinner, drawing borders with rulers on maps with no regard for the peoples, kingdoms, or cultures they were dividing. In the metropolis of the modern world, in the closing year of the 19th century, a congress of men and women of African blood assembled to deliberate upon the present situation and outlook of the darker races of mankind. It was a gathering that would plant a seed that would grow into a movement, and that movement would one day shake the foundations of empire. The man who convened this meeting was Henry Sylvester Williams, a Trinidadian lawyer who had founded the African Association in London 3 years earlier, in 1897. Williams had coined the terms Pan-African and Pan-Africanism. His vision was simple yet revolutionary: to promote the political, socio-economic, and cultural unity of Africa and its diaspora. 32 delegates assembled at Westminster Hall in London from 23 to 25 July 1900. They came from Africa, the Caribbean, and the United States. Among them was a young African-American scholar-activist named W.E.B. Du Bois. Standing before that assembly, Du Bois uttered words that would echo through the century to come. The problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line. The conference sent a message to Queen Victoria, complaining about the ill treatment of blacks in South Africa and Rhodesia. They called for self-government, for the recognition of women's rights, and far-sightedly, for reparations to be paid to Africans for slavery and colonialism. It was a modest beginning, but the word Pan-African had entered the dictionaries for the first time. Part 2. The Diaspora Intellectuals. Du Bois and Padmore. Between 1919 and 1945, 5 Pan-African congresses took place in Europe and America. They were dominated by towering diaspora intellectuals, men like W.E.B., Du Bois, and George Padmore. Du Bois became the moving spirit of these congresses. The first was held in Paris in 1919, simultaneously with the Versailles Peace Conference after the First World War. Delegates called for the abolition of slave labor, laws to protect Africans, the right to education, and African participation in their own government. The Second Congress took place in London and Brussels in 1921, the third in Lisbon in 1923, the fourth in New York in 1927. But these early gatherings were often elite in composition and moderate in tone. Most delegates were lawyers, scholars, clergy, and professionals. They worked largely within the moral framework of empire, advocating for reform and racial equality rather than complete decolonization. Then came George Padmore. Born Malcolm Ivan Meredith Nurse in Trinidad in 1903, Padmore was the grandson of an Ashanti warrior who had been taken prisoner and sold into slavery. He studied in the United States, joined the Communist Party, and moved to Moscow to head the Comintern's Negro Bureau. But in 1933, he broke with the Communists and settled in London in 1936. In London, Padmore became the center of a community of writers dedicated to Pan-Africanism and African independence. He collaborated with his childhood friend C.L.R. James, the Trinidadian Marxist theorist, and other Caribbean and African intellectuals. Together, they founded the International African Service Bureau in 1937, which merged into the Pan-African Federation in 1944. Padmore did more than perhaps any other single individual to shape the theory and discourse of Pan-African anti-imperialism. His articles linked African American struggles with liberation movements in Africa and with African diaspora peoples around the world. The movement was ready for its moment. Part 3, The Manchester Moment, October 1945. The Second World War had globalized racial politics. Black soldiers had fought for Allied democracy, only to return to segregation, discrimination, and colonial subjugation. A younger, more radical generation now led the movement, one rooted not in respectability politics, but in mass mobilization and anti-colonial revolution. In October 1945, in the grey northern industrial city of Manchester, history gathered in a hall. The 5th Pan-African Congress was held in the Chorlton-on-Medlock Town Hall from 15 to 21 October. Roughly 87 delegates from over 50 organizations attended, representing Africa, the Caribbean, the United States, and the Black British diaspora. Manchester was no accident. It was the city where cotton from slave plantations in the Americas had fueled industrial growth. Yet it was also a city of resistance, home to strong trade unions, anti-slavery societies, and working-class internationalism. Manchester's black communities, students, seafarers, ex-servicemen and workers were politically active. Organizations like the West African Students' Union, the Negro Welfare Center, and the Pan-African Federation had roots in the city. The Congress was organized by George Padmore, along with Ras Makonnen, a Guyanese-born businessman whose bookshop and cafe acted as an organizing hub, and a young Ghanaian student named Kwame Nkrumah. W.E.B. Du Bois presided as elder statesman. What they demanded was clear and uncompromising. We are determined to fight for the complete and absolute independence of the peoples of Africa and the West Indies. The delegates of the 5th Pan-African Congress believe in the right of all peoples to govern themselves. We demand for Black Africa autonomy and independence. For 6 days they debated, planned, and resolved. The hall was shabby, the world still weary from war, but the words spoken there resounded like a trumpet. Among the delegates were men who would soon become the faces of African independence. Part 4. The student from the Gold Coast, Kwame Nkrumah. Kwame Nkrumah was born on 21st September 1909 in Nkrumah, a small village in the British colony of the Gold Coast. The son of a goldsmith, he trained as a teacher. But his mind was restless, reaching beyond the narrow paths laid out by colonial education. In 1935, he sailed for the United States, enrolling at Lincoln University, the first historically black university. There he studied economics, sociology, and theology, later earning a master's degree in political science at the University of Pennsylvania. America gave him both hardship and inspiration. He worked odd jobs to survive, but he also found himself immersed in Harlem's political ferment. He read Marcus Garvey, debated socialism, and came to believe that liberation was both a political and a spiritual task. Colonialism, he saw, did not only chain nations, it also colonized the mind. To free Africa, Africans would have to believe in themselves again. In 1945, he moved to London. Britain was still war-scarred, rationing its food and rebuilding its cities. But in the cafes and meeting halls of London, colonial students gathered, impatient for change. It was here that Nkrumah met George Padmore, the Trinidadian radical who became his mentor. Together they organized the Manchester Congress. Nkrumah later wrote that Manchester fired me with a new sense of mission. That fire would carry him back across the seas to the Gold Coast. In 1957, Ghana became the first black African nation to achieve independence. Nkrumah declared that Ghana's independence was pointless unless it was connected with the total liberation of the African continent. He designed Ghana's flag using the colors of Marcus Garvey's Black Star shipping line, red, black, and green, and named the national football team the Black Stars. It was a direct line from the diaspora dreamers to the African reality. Part 5. The Elder from Kenya, Jomo Kenyatta. Jomo Kenyatta was born to Kikuyu farmers in Kiambu, British East Africa. Educated at a mission school, he worked in various jobs before becoming politically engaged through the Kikuyu Central Association. In 1929, he traveled to London to lobby for Kikuyu land affairs. During the 1930s, he studied at Moscow's Communist University, University College London, and the London School of Economics. In 1938, he published an anthropological study of Kikuyu life. Influenced by his friend George Padmore, he embraced anti-colonialist and Pan-African ideas. At the Manchester Congress in 1945, Kenyatta stood alongside Nkrumah, co-organizing the historic gathering. He returned to Kenya in 1946 and became president of the Kenya-African Union, lobbying for independence from British colonial rule. In 1952, he was among the Kapenguria Six arrested and charged with masterminding the anti-colonial Mau Mau uprising. Though he protested his innocence, he was convicted and remained imprisoned until 1959, then exiled until 1961. In 1963, Kenya became independent and Kenyatta became the country's first prime minister, then its first president. The return of Kenyatta and Nkrumah to Africa was not just a turning point in Pan-Africanism in Britain, but of the movement as a whole. Their activism was to focus on and operate from within the continent. Part 6. The Legacy, From Idea to Reality. By the time of the 5th Pan-African Congress in Manchester in 1945, the movement had shifted its center of influence from the Diaspora to Africa. The intellectual migration was complete. The ideas that had been forged in London, drawing rooms, Harlem cafes, and Moscow party offices had found their way home. The Congress provided a forum that was a precursor to the development of a number of African independence movements. Within a decade and a half of Manchester, the dominoes began to fall. 1957, Ghana under Nkrumah. 1960, 17 African nations gained independence. 1963, Kenya under Kenyatta. 1963, the Organization of African Unity was founded. Pan-Africanism had transformed from a dream of diaspora intellectuals into a concrete political blueprint for sovereignty. The scattered voices from across the Atlantic had found their chorus on the continent. Conclusion: the thread that connects the story of the Pan-African movement is the story of an idea that refused to die. It began with a Trinidadian lawyer in London who gave it a name. It was nurtured by an African-American scholar who gave it a voice. It was radicalized by a Trinidadian journalist who gave it a strategy. And it was realized by African students who took those ideas home and built nations from them. From Henry Sylvester Williams to W.E.B. Du Bois, from George Padmore to Kwame Nkrumah and Jomo Kenyatta, the thread is unbroken. The diaspora intellectuals did not merely dream of African freedom. They built the intellectual and organizational infrastructure that made that freedom possible. They transformed racial solidarity into political action, bridging the gap between transatlantic scholarship and the grassroots movements that dismantled European colonial administrations across Africa. The problem of the 20th century was the problem of the color line, as Du Bois had prophesied. But the solution of the 20th century, in Africa at least, was the triumph of Pan-Africanism. We are determined to be free. We want education. We want the right to govern ourselves. Those words from Manchester in 1945 were not just a declaration. They were a promise. And within a generation, that promise was kept. The outro, call to action for subscriptions. And that is how an idea, forged in exile, returned home to reshape an entire continent. Nkrumah's Ghana became the torchbearer. Kenyatta's Kenya proved the flame was unstoppable. Together, their victory didn't just end colonial rule, it laid the very foundation for the African unity and regional cooperation we've explored in our previous episodes on the AU and SADC. History is not just about the past, it is the blueprint for our future. If this journey from intellectual migration to sovereign nations captivated you, then hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell right now. Become part of the Decroly History Hub family, where we don't just memorize dates, we unearth the powerful stories that built our modern world. We want to hear from you. Which leader's resilience struck you the most? Nkrumah's vision or Kenyatta's defiance? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share this with a fellow history enthusiast, and stay connected. This is Decroly History Hub, keeping the past alive for the future. See you in the next one.